Hello, I'm John Stoncel. In order for us to fully understand, we must look at each individually and open our minds as we delve into the three types of economies. For the next few minutes, we will enter a world for which some of us have never imagined or never realized that we too are a part of. To do this, we must open your mind as we take a look at capitalism, socialism, and communism. So what is capitalism? Capitalism is an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit, rather than by the state. Let's look at what capitalism looks like. First, we will discuss the top 5 capitalist countries in the world. Number 5, Japan. The Japanese economy has rebounded from its near collapse in the 1900s and has prospered with keiretsu networks. Japan has a state-led economic machine, which keeps the country in healthy economic shape. Japan has been interested in reform in a few major areas such as labor relations, bank relations, corporate governance, and supply relations. Reform in Japan has included the country allowing more of the U.S. management style of capitalism, with restructuring to lay off workers when production is at the lowest cycles. Japanese companies also have learned to focus on specialization instead of going into too many business areas, which are diversified. By focusing on a few key industries, they are able to capitalize on gains and become industry leaders in many fields, such as in high technology for mobile telephones and other communication components. Japan has continued with a hierarchy system, which rewards loyalty and long-term employment with the same organization by the employees. By stressing a seniority-based pay system, the Japanese have encouraged employees to stay at one company for their entire lives. Number 4, India. India is beginning to realize its potential economically as it encourages capitalism throughout the country. The infrastructure is limited by the human capital available to take jobs offered by the companies poised to hire qualified candidates as corporations globally look to India for offshore needs, call center and telemarketing, etc. Between India and China, they both account for the world's population at almost 40% all told. The Indian government realizes the potential of capitalistic growth as it struggles to overcome an outdated caste system. India has a problem with its distribution of income and access to free markets, since many of its residents are poor and have no way out of poverty. Most residents of India are Hindus, and although they worship Shiva or Vishnu, India still struggles with the caste system, ranking humans in inherited socioeconomic classes. For this reason, a person is either born rich or born poor, and has no way to reverse that status going forward. With the idea that much of its population is considered untouchable, Dalit or unclean, it should be difficult for the country as a whole to prosper. But in fact, the rich get richer despite these internal issues. In the early part of the century, the caste system hampered India's development, but today lower castes are demanding to be reclassified and given full-paying jobs which allow them to qualify for benefits, privileges, and a chance at a higher quality life which was not possible in years past. Although many Indian residents are still illiterate, though Indian literacy rates are improving, they are realizing that it is possible to pull themselves out of poverty by any means possible. At the upper levels of education, India excels and produces very high qualified graduates who go on to study and work in other countries around the world. Number 3, China. China has focused on the last 50 years on educating the masses, and the effort has paid off. Adult literacy in China has risen to almost 95% and is steadily rising. China is placing a priority on the development of its human capital and offers its workers more on the dollar to produce goods for export. China reformed its economy and began to see economic growth. As a result, the GDP doubled, and the government allowed a pro-business and market attitude to rule in the country as a whole. China focused on exporting goods and developed a new economy as a result. Its new focus on manufactured products created over 100 million jobs for the Chinese, which supported capitalism in the country and offered a higher quality of life for the residents. China is also a large global exporter, along with Germany and the United States. But is China really a capitalist country? In a way, yes. The Chinese government allows entrepreneurship, as long as it's done with the permission of the government. Number 2, the United States. Americans are known to be risk takers and capital makers. In the US, it is possible to begin a business of humble means and expand it to grow into a conglomerate business model for people wanting to start a new business. Imagine a tiny dry cleaner who adds space in strip malls and soon owns over 20 businesses. This is the epitome of wealth and capitalism in the US. Capitalism in the US has no color and welcomes anyone willing to work hard, market a product, and to bring it to fruition. Americans are said to be moved by their fear of failure and their greed for monetary success. Capitalism allows private ownership to spur production of goods and allows the private owner to keep and track profits for what sells. This allows exclusive rights and patents to the production of modern technology and boosts the social economy. Groups within industry shape the model for success in agriculture, commerce, service industries, technology, and other industries. There are allowances for monopolies in financing, international trade, commodities, banking, insurance, and commerce. Some of these monopolies are family-run companies, which are leaders in their industries and who have goodwill in the community, which breeds loyalty for their products, services among competitive markets, and the masses. At the top of the list is Germany at number 1. Germany tops our list of one of the most capitalist countries in the world. Capitalism in Germany is found in its institutions such as banking and educational systems. German industries have prospered because the country has made it a priority to train its labor force to succeed in various industries. These various systems have worked together to make a robust capitalistic market for the country. The German model of prosperity supports allowing local entrepreneurs to develop and initiate new industries which help the people to communicate better with the world and to meet their needs in becoming current world players in the technology industries. The flow of goods exported from Germany are grouped into sectors, and Germany has the dominant role in exporting for markets which specialize in goods which are the result of patents, niches, markets and new innovations, and inventions within the country. For example, in the media industry, prosperous subsectors would be film, radio, television, teleservices, advertisement, printing, and publishing houses, and data processing software. Now let's take a look at some of the pros of capitalism. Capitalism is an economic system characterized by lack of government intervention, means of production owned by private firms, goods and services distributed according to price mechanism as opposed to government price controls. Milton Friedman once said, "A society that puts quality before freedom will get neither. A society that puts freedom before equality will get a high degree of both." Economic freedom helps political freedom. If governments own the means of production and sets prices, it invariably leads to a powerful state and creates a large bureaucracy, which may extend into other areas of life. Efficiency. Firms in a capitalist-based society face incentives to be efficient and produce goods which are demanded. These incentives create the pressures to cut costs and avoid waste. State-owned firms often tend to be more inefficient, less willing to get rid of surplus workers, and fewer incentives to try new innovative working practices. Innovation. Capitalism has a dynamic where entrepreneurs and firms are seeking to create and develop profitable products. Therefore, they will not be stagnant but invest in new products which may be popular with consumers. This can lead to product development and more choice of goods. Economic growth. With firms and individuals facing incentives to be more innovative and work hard, this creates a climate of innovation and economic expansion. This helps to increase the real GDP and lead to improved living standards. This increased wealth enables a higher standard of living. In theory, everyone can benefit from this increased wealth, and there is a trickle-down effect from rich to poor. There are no better alternatives. As Winston Churchill, it has been said that democracy is the worst form of government except all the others that have been tried. A similar statement could apply to capitalism. Although capitalism seems to be go-to, it does unfortunately have its cons. Capitalism is the astounding belief that the most wickedest of men will do the most wickedest of things for the greatest good for everyone. Quote John Maynard Keynes. Monopoly power. Private ownership of capital enables firms to gain monopoly power in product and labor markets. Firms with monopoly power can exploit their position to charge higher prices. Monopoly power. Firms with monopoly power can pay lower wages to workers in capitalist societies. There is often great inequality between the owners of capital and those who work for firms. Social benefit ignored. A free market will ignore externalities. A profit-maximizing capitalist firm is likely to ignore the negative externalities, such as pollution from production. This can harm living standards. Similarly, a free market economy will underprovide goods with positive externalities, such as health, public transport, and education. This leads to an inefficient allocation of resources. Even supporters of capitalism will admit that government provision of certain public goods and public services are essential to maximize the potential of a capitalist society. Inherited wealth and wealth inequality. A capitalist society is based on the legal right to private property and the ability to pass on wealth to future generations. Capitalists argue that a capitalist society is fair because you gain the rewards of your hard work, but often people are rich simply because they inherit wealth or are born into a privileged class. Therefore, capitalist society not only fails to create equality of outcome, but also fails to provide equality of opportunity. Inequality creates social division. Societies which are highly unequal create resentment and social division, diminishing marginal utility of wealth. A capitalist society argues it is good if people can earn more, leading to economic and wealth inequality. However, this ignores the diminishing marginal utility of wealth. A millionaire who gets an extra million sees little increase in economic welfare, but that 1 million spent on health care will provide a much bigger increase in social welfare. Boom and bust cycles. Capitalist economies had a tendency to booms and bust with painful recessions and mass unemployment. All types of capitalism imply that the economy is market-based. However, within the broad term of capitalism, there are different varieties which can have profoundly different outcomes. For example, unregulated capitalism, sometimes termed turbo-capitalism, will see greater problems associated with inequality, under provision of public services and greater inequality. A primarily capitalist society with some regulation on inequality, environment, and monopoly power can create a very different outcome to a pure capitalist society. When people talk about capitalist societies, the US, there is actually significant government intervention in areas such as education, healthcare, and transport. US government accounts for around 35% of GDP. Even a country like France, where the government spends 50% of GDP, has an economy which may be considered to be primarily free market. There is no clear-cut point when an economy stops being capitalist and becomes a mixed economy. Next, we will enter the world of communism. Communism is a political theory derived from Karl Marx, advocating class war and leading to a society in which all property is publicly owned and each person works and is paid according to their abilities and needs. Let's take a look at what communism looks like. The basic principles of communism were articulated in the mid-1800s by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, two German economic and political philosophers. But it wasn't until the Russian Revolution of 1917 that a communist nation, the Soviet Union, was born. By the middle of the 20th century, it appeared that communism could supersede democracy as the dominant political and economic ideology. Yet today, only 5 communist countries remain in the world. Number 5. Vietnam, the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. Vietnam was partitioned at a 1954 conference that followed the First Indochina War. While the partition was supposed to be temporary, North Vietnam became communist and supported by the Soviet Union, while South Vietnam was democratic and supported by the United States. Following 2 decades of war, the two parts of Vietnam were unified, and in 1976, Vietnam as a unified country became communist. Like other communist countries, Vietnam has in recent decades moved towards a free market economy that has some of its socialist ideals supplanted by capitalism. The U.S. normalized relations with Vietnam in 1995 under then President Bill Clinton. Number 4. North Korea. DPRK, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Korea, which was occupied by Japan in World War II, was divided following the war into a Russian-dominated North and an American-occupied South. At the time, no one thought the partition would be permanent. North Korea did not become a communist country until 1948, when South Korea declared its independence from the North, which quickly declared its own sovereignty. Backed by Russia, Korean communist leader Kim Il-sung was enlisted as leader of the new nation. The North Korean government doesn't consider itself communist, even if most world governments do. Instead, the Kim family has promoted its own brand of communism based on the concept of juche, self-reliance. First introduced in the mid-1950s, juche promotes Korean nationalism as embodied in the leadership of and cult-like devotion to the Kims. Juche became official state policy in the 1970s and was continued under the rule of Kim Jong-il, who succeeded his father in 1994, and Kim Jong-un, who rose to power in 2011. In 2009, the economy's constitution was changed to remove all mention of the Marxist and Leninist ideals that are the foundation of communism, and the very word communism was also removed. Number 3. Laos. Lao People's Democratic Republic. Laos. Officially, the Lao People's Democratic Republic became a communist country in 1975 following a revolution supported by Vietnam and the Soviet Union. The country has been a monarchy. The country's government is largely run by military generals who support a one-party system grounded in Marxist ideals. In 1988, the country began allowing some forms of private ownership, and it joined the World Trade Organization in 2013. Number 2. Cuba. Republic of Cuba. A revolution in 1959 led to the takeover of the Cuban government by Fidel Castro and his associates. By 1961, Cuba became a fully communist country and developed those ties to the Soviet Union. At the same time, the United States imposed a ban on all trade with Cuba. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Cuba was forced to find a new source for trade and financial subsidies, which the nation did, with countries including China, Bolivia, and Venezuela. In 2008, Fidel Castro stepped down and his brother Raul Castro became president. Fidel died in 2016. Under U.S. President Barack Obama, relations between the two nations were relaxed and travel restrictions loosened during Obama's second term. In June 2017, however, President Donald Trump tightened travel restrictions on Cuba. At the top of the list is China. Mao Zedong took control over China in 1949 and proclaimed the nation as the People's Republic of China, a communist country. China has remained consistently communist since 1949, although economic reforms have been in place for several years. China has been called Red China due to the Communist Party's control over the country. China does have political parties other than the Communist Party of China, CPC, and open elections are held locally throughout the country. That said, however, the CPC has control over all political appointments, and little opposition typically exists for the ruling Communist Party. As China has opened up to the rest of the world in recent decades, the resulting disparities of wealth have eroded some of the principles of communism. And in 2004, the country's constitution was changed to recognize private property. Communism is both a political system and an economic one. Communist parties have absolute power over governance, and elections are single-party affairs. The party controls the economic system as well, and private ownership is illegal, although this facet of communist rule has changed in some countries like China. By contrast, socialist nations are generally democratic with multi-party political systems. The Socialist Party does not have to be in power for socialist principles, such as a strong social safety net and government ownership of key industries and infrastructure, to be a part of a nation's domestic agenda. Unlike communism, private ownership is encouraged in most socialist nations. The pros and cons of communism might be based on utopian ideas, but the outcomes tend to example dystopian societies instead. It is a system of government that looks good on paper because it focuses on equality and building everyone up at the same time. It is also a system that struggles in practical application because of the demands that the party, state, or government places on its people. So what are the problems of communism? Individual rights are restricted. The goal of communism is to have people working toward common goals and needs. For that reason, people are not free to pursue their own interests. Their job assignments are based on what the community requires for survival. Someone might be a great writer on comparing pros and cons of subjects. But if the community needs an auto mechanic for the common good, then guess what the writer gets to be? An auto mechanic. There is no unauthorized opposition. In a communist structure, there is one overall entity which controls the message and agenda of the society. They have an absolute rule over the law and can even outlaw private ownership of any capitalistic item, such as currency or property. This absolute control is bolstered by the idea that only authorized opposition to new ideas, strategies, or work assignments may be allowed. If you don't agree with the direction of the society, you could be imprisoned or worse. People are kept in ignorance. The design of communism feels Orwellian when implemented. The single party can control the message that people receive within the country. There is rarely any contact with the outside world that has not been screened by the government first. That means the population can think that they are informed on current events, but in reality, they are purposely kept in ignorance for the benefit of the community. Violence tends to be the only option for dissent. Because only authorized dissent is allowed in communism, people who feel like their voices are not being heard tend to resort to violence or violent rhetoric to make their point. The risk of terrorism increases, which then increases the government response to threats of opposition. Secret police and other forms of enforcement are then used to maintain control within the governmental structure. Earnings is limited. There are specific caps placed on the amount of income that can be earned by individuals within the structure of government. These hard caps make it difficult for innovation to grow because there is no motivation to work harder. People know they need to complete a specific level of productivity to reach their community needs and have no reason to go beyond the bare minimum because of compensation caps that are in place. It often results in poverty. Communism might have the goal of uplifting everyone in society, but in reality, it often drives most households into poverty. The structure is easy to manipulate for government officials because only the entity has oversight over everything in the society. One politician can tweak the rules and laws so that their class of people receive the most compensation while still mandating everyone else to work for virtually nothing. Communism might meet needs, but it is often only the bare essentials. No savings are allowed. Even if a household were to accumulate some level of wealth, that wealth belongs to the community and not the family. There is no precedent for inheritance under true communism because everything belongs to the singular party, state, or government. Employment may go up, but meaningful employment goes down. Under communism, you're essentially working to earn a paycheck that you'll never really see. You get enough to provide for yourself, but the remainder of your wages and productivity goes to the benefit of the community. Many people living within this form of government aren't following their passion because they don't have the final say in their career. In many instances, people just gave up trying to work and let the government provide their basic needs for them. And finally, we have come to the part of the program where we look at what seems to be working its way in around the world: socialism. Socialism is a range of economic and social systems characterized by social ownership and worker self-management of the means of production, as well as the political theories and movements associated with them. Number 8, Belgium. Belgium has the most of the same social security benefits that New Zealand offers, including invalid and old age pensions. The welfare system causes much of the country's budget deficient, though. It is considered by some to be a burden on society. Number 7, New Zealand. New Zealand may not be a socialist country, but the welfare system in the country is very wide-ranging, offering support for housing, unemployment, health, childcare, and education as well. Therefore, New Zealand has many of the characteristics of a socialist country, even while remaining officially free market. Number 6, Ireland. Ireland has arguably one of the best welfare systems in the world, with unemployment checks higher on average than Denmark or Switzerland's average. Around 25% of Ireland's GDP goes towards paying for the welfare system, as compared to 15% of America's GDP towards America's social support programs. Number 5, Sweden. Sweden has a large welfare system, but due to a high national debt, required much government intervention in the economy. In Norway, the government controls certain key aspects of the national economy, and they also have one of the best welfare systems in the world. With Norway having one of the highest standards of living in all Europe, Norway is not a member of the European Union. Number 4, Canada. Like the Netherlands, Canada also has mostly a free market economy, but is a very extensive welfare system that includes free health and medical care. Canadians remain more open-minded and liberal than Americans, and Canada is ranked as one of the best top 5 countries to live in by the United Nations and the Human Development Index, HDI, rankings. Number 3, Finland. Finland has one of the world's best education systems, with no tuition fees and also giving free meals to their students. The literacy rate in Finland is 100%. Finland has one of the highest standards of living in the world. Like Denmark and other European countries, equality is considered one of the most important values in society, whereas in the Netherlands, government control over the economy remains at a minimum, but a socialist welfare system remains. The lifestyle in the Netherlands is very egalitarian and organized, where even bosses do not discipline or treat their subordinates rudely. Number 2, Denmark. Denmark has a wide range of welfare benefits that they offer their citizens. As a result, they also have the highest taxes in the world. Equality is considered the most important value in Denmark. Some businesses thrive, with over 70% of companies having 50 employees or less. And number 1, once again, China. In China, the government manages and controls the economy. Many of the domestic companies are owned and run by the government. Recently, the Chinese economy has become more geared towards capitalism, but it is still officially socialist. Life in China remains relatively less stressful and more relaxed than life in capitalist countries like America. So what are the pros? It creates a system without classes. How many different classes are in a capitalistic society? There is a wealthy class, there's a middle class, there are the elites. In 2017, the Trump administration even began referring to the educated class. In socialism, all that goes away because it is a community-based system. Equal opportunities are preserved. Equal opportunities are presented to everyone. It doesn't matter how wealthy they are, what their skin color happens to be, or whatever other label might be used to create division. It strives for equality by any means necessary. It eliminates the socioeconomic gaps. Have you ever heard the phrase, "it takes money to make money"? In socialism, the community takes over the governing production units and distribution. These units are then presented to the workers. As distribution needs increase, work needs increase. And that allows profits to increase for everyone on an equal basis instead of a trickle-down basis from the top. It creates balance. Many of the disparities that are seen in society today come from communities that are out of balance. People with more wealth can access better healthcare options than those who are poor. Households with high annual incomes can eat better foods than households with low annual incomes. Socialism strives to reinforce the idea that everyone is created equally and deserves a community that which treat them with equality. This creates a greater balance between people within the same community. It improves the standard of living. Because resources are distributed in an equal fashion, there is no poverty in socialism unless there are no resources to distribute. The goal is to raise the living standards for those who are struggling. It is true that this comes to the expense of those who are well off. But is it truly ethical to be living in comfort and luxury when right down the street someone else is living in deplorable conditions? It encourages skill enhancement. People within socialism are commodities because of their ability to work and produce. Each person can contribute their strengths to the betterment of the general society. That allows for more people to work, which encourages economic growth with the goal of improving personal circumstances by promoting the community's welfare first. So the cons of socialism. it has never been implemented in its true form. The issue with socialism is that implementing it as imagined is virtually impossible. Someone must supervise the distribution of resources, which means there is a lot of power and responsibility placed in that position. It is easily enough to manipulate the distribution lines to benefit a few at the expenses of many. That is essentially how communism works, having the people work to improve the government while being given only the basics for survival. It can be easily manipulated. The people in charge of distribution are not the only ones who can manipulate the structure of socialism. The news can be manipulated to create certain political leanings. The law can be manipulated to prevent people from confronting corruption within the system. Each area of manipulation takes a person further away from having control over their own life and puts them into a position where they must defend it to keep it. It creates a race to the bottom. When implemented historically, those who have pursued socialism have redistributed wealth in an attempt to create balance. That wealth never really makes it to those who are living in poverty. The primary criticism of socialism is that it doesn't improve living standards for the majority. It simply lowers the living standards for those who have means to have them come closer to living in poverty without raising the poor up. It encourages worker incompetence. In a perfect scenario, a community would utilize the natural skills and strengths of each worker, assigning them to the job that they are most capable of performing at high production levels. In reality, jobs are often assigned in a system of socialism based on the greatest needs of the society. That means if there is a food shortage, you're going to be a farmer, even if you kill everything you try to grow. This creates a level of professional incompetence. In some industries, that can be difficult to overcome. It can reduce the workforce. The bottom line for many critics of socialism is this: that it encourages laziness. If a person knows that they will receive payments for food, housing, and clothing, then there is no incentive to keep working. They can collect the payments, have their basic needs met, and enjoy life without the worry of a workday. This can affect the morale of those who do work, since those who don't work earn the same amount as those who do. That is why socialism tends to negatively impact economic growth unless there is a requirement to work. It limits innovation. Under a system of socialism, the goal is to meet the basic human needs first. Then the goal of satisfying the local economic demands is implemented. Only then, after these two areas of concern have been addressed, will trade with other communities be considered. Because of this structure, innovation is discouraged in socialism because the work efforts are dedicated to distributing output for essential self-survival purposes only. There is no incentive to innovate because there is no guarantee of success, which socialism demands. Capitalism and socialism are economic systems that countries use to manage their economic resources and regulate the means of production. In the United States, capitalism has always been the prevailing system. Communist countries like China, North Korea, and Cuba tend towards socialism, while Western European countries favor capitalist economies and try to chart a middle course. But even at their extremes, both systems can have their pros and cons. Capitalism and the invisible hand. In capitalist economies, governments play a minimum role in deciding what to produce, how much to produce, and when to produce it, leaving the cost of goods and services to market forces. When entrepreneurs spot openings in the marketplace, they rush in to fill the vacuum. In his seminal work, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, economist Adam Smith described the ways in which people are motivated to act in their own self-interest. This tendency serves as the basis for capitalism, with the invisible hand of the market serving as the balance between competing tendencies. Because markets distribute the factors of production, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, in accord with supply and demand, the government can limit itself to enacting the enforcing rules of fair play. Socialism and centralized planning. In socialist economies, important economic decisions are not left to the markets or decided by self-interested individuals. Instead, the government, which owns or controls much of the economy's resources, decides what, whens, and hows of production. This approach is also called centralized planning. Socialism is influenced by the theories of Friedrich Engels and Karl Marx, and by their 1848 treatise, the Communist Manifesto. But socialism is more permissive than pure communism, which makes no allowances for private property. Capitalism provides more incentives. In capitalist economies, people have strong incentives to work hard, increase efficiency, and produce superior products. By rewarding ingenuity and innovation, the market maximizes economic growth and individual prosperity while providing a variety of goods for consumers. By encouraging the production of desirable goods and discouraging the production of unwanted or unnecessary ones, the marketplace self-regulates, leaving less room for government interference and mismanagement. Markets are not infallible. Because market mechanisms are mechanical rather than normative and agnostic in regards to social effects, there are no guarantees that each person's basic needs will be met. Markets also create cycles of boom and bust, and in an imperfect world allow for crony capitalism, monopolies, and other means of cheating or manipulating the system. Under socialism, basic needs are met. A socialist system primary benefits is that the people living under it are giving a social safety net. In theory, economic inequality is reduced. So is economic insecurity. Basic necessities are provided for. Government itself can produce the goods people require to meet the needs, even if the production of those goods does not result in profit. Under socialism, there's more room for value judgments, with less attention paid to calculations involving profit and nothing but profit. Socialist economies can also be more efficient in the sense that there's less of a need to sell goods to consumers who might not need them, resulting in less money spent on product promotion and marketing efforts, but fewer incentives. Socialism sounds more compassionate, but it does have its shortcomings. One disadvantage is that people have less to strive for and feel less connected to the fruits of their efforts. With their basic needs already provided for, they have fewer incentives to innovate and increase efficiency. As a result, the engines of economic growth are weaker. Another strike against socialism: government planners and planning mechanisms are not infallible or incorruptible. In some socialist economies, there are shortfalls of even the most essential goods. Because there's no free market to ease adjustments, the system may not regulate itself as quickly or as well. Equality is another concern. In theory, everyone is equal under socialism. In practice, hierarchies do emerge, and party officials and well-connected individuals find themselves in better positions to receive favored goods. So, no doubt that the science of economics will guide the development of future economies, fine-tuning them by promoting what works and eliminating what doesn't work. But only if the influence of special interests and power grabs by megalomaniacs can be limited or eliminated. And by understanding economies, the electorate can avoid bamboozlement by suspicious advertising and talking points, and vote for politicians that would better serve the people instead of themselves. I'm John Stoncel. Thank you for watching.